Cubic 851, turn right, heading 180. Order 14 Papa, turn right 245, report localizer established.
Hey everyone, welcome back to DJ's Aviation. Since my very first video on the undeveloped MD-12, a lot of you have been asking for more content on the aircraft, as it does seem to be something of great interest to you all, and in all honesty, myself as well. You may recall I published a video discussing the A380 and the MD-12. This was put out around a week ago. I did later take it down as I honestly was unhappy with the end result, and I would rather take it down than leave it up as it does reflect on my overall channel and the content that I can produce. Now, while the MD-12 was never officially released, the potential it had was very exciting, and in today's video I really want to explore that, and the impact it may have had on the aviation industry if it was released. Now, this does include discussions on the A380, 747, and more aircraft. Before I properly begin, I need to give a disclaimer just to make it very clear that this plane never flew, and I did not make up the MD-12 name. It was in fact studied and proposed by McDonnell Douglas. However, like some of the other variants featured on the channel, it never got up in the air. And finally, I want to let you know that this video will feature an assortment of aircraft variants. However, it will mostly be the 747 and the Airbus A380. You may ask why. Well, the MD-12 was never released, and we got very few renderings. In turn, this has meant that making content on it can be difficult, and I simply don't want you getting bored staring at the one thing for the entirety of this very long video. Rest assured, I've also taken your feedback on board, and will be pairing up aircraft types when I do mention them in this video. Anyway, grab some popcorn as this is set to be quite a long video. We'll begin with a detailed look at the MD-12. Why was it originally discussed and studied, how it came about, which features it would have, and so on. Later, I'll move on to discussing the variants, which are something that do really interest me. The McDonnell Douglas MD-12 is an aircraft which was set to be another super jumbo within the industry. Funnily enough, if we trace back to the original plan for the aircraft, it wasn't actually set to be a quadjet, rather a trijet. The idea of the MD-12 being a trijet came about because of the success of the MD-11. McDonnell Douglas wanted the MD-12X at the time to be essentially a stretched MD-11. In addition, they eyed this MD-12X to have a lower front passenger deck, which would give those on board panoramic views for ultimate viewing pleasure. The design was offered to airlines in 1991 by the McDonnell Douglas Board of Directors. However, it didn't attract any noteworthy attention, but was certainly popular enough for the Taiwan Aerospace Corporation to sign an MOU to form a company with McDonnell Douglas, which in turn would produce this design for customers. McDonnell Douglas was set to take a 51% stake in the company, and therefore be the majority shareholder. While the Taiwan Aerospace Corporation were helping form the company, they would only take a 40% stake in it, with the remaining 9% being filtered across a number of other Asian companies which would help produce the very first MD-12. However, after a lot of discussion, McDonnell Douglas continued to play around with the key design features of this MD-12X. Before long, the MD-12X transformed into simply the MD-12, with the X part being dropped. The difference with this aircraft was that it would feature 4 engines instead of the originally planned 3, therefore taking it from a trijet to a quadjet and in turn a super jumbo, which would rival the likes of the proposed Boeing NLA, which I will be covering in a future video, and the yet to be released Airbus A3XX, now known as the A380. And finally, at the time, it would even go up against the Boeing 747. However, this MD-12 was set to be bigger than the 747, and it roughly came in at 63.4 meters or 208 feet in length. McDonnell Douglas paraded this aircraft around while they could. At every available air show, they did attempt to gather orders in. They communicated with airlines potentially showing a bit of interest that the first MD-12 would enter service in around 1997. However, as we know, they did fail, and eventually the project was stopped. Now that we've outlined a bit about the MD-12, its origins, and how it developed over the years, from a trijet to a quadjet, I want to discuss the variants and the overall impact that they would have had on the aviation industry hypothetically. McDonnell Douglas proposed 4 variants, and for an aircraft of its size, this did come as a bit of a surprise. However, if we actually take a look at the Boeing 747 series, over the course of the last few decades, multiple variants have either been released or proposed. and one could definitely say the McDonnell Douglas were looking at a very similar pathway. After all, the 1990s were a period known not only for the introduction of the 777 and A330, but also they were known as the years when full double-decker, four-engined aircraft started coming into the picture of the industry. So, McDonnell Douglas at the time weren't really making an odd move. One could argue in 2018 that they would be a little bit crazy to be launching 4 variants of an aircraft of its size, but this was almost 30 years ago and we have to remember that. McDonnell Douglas proposed the following variants. Essentially what I'll be doing is outlining them one at a time, and then discuss my opinions on what they may have done for the aviation industry. Firstly, there was the MD-12 HC, the HC part standing for high capacity. Specifications for all the variants aren't very accurate, however we have had some information trickle in on this variant in particular. It would roughly seat 511 passengers in 3 classes. Ultimately, this could be altered depending on an airline's preferences when it came to fitting the cabin out. First things first, with this variant is the space provided is a positive, obviously. At the time, the Boeing 747 was only a partial double-decker aircraft that was known for its iconic hump. Having a full double-decker would have allowed airlines that did purchase the MD-12 to do things very similar to the A380, but at an earlier date. They could have not only implemented state-of-the-art first-class suites, but also installed the onboard lounges and bars, which we now see on the A380. This would have been done without the concern of losing space and seating, like what is found on the 747. Because at the end of the day, you could fill the MD-12 with the same configuration as the 747, and use the added hump for other features of interest. In addition, this high-capacity variant could have played quite the critical role for airlines into slot-restricted airports in this day and age. We see Emirates, who operate their A380 into slot-restricted airports, and while it isn't the most efficient aircraft on the market, it can certainly allow customers to use it on high-demand routes and fill the aircraft up. ANA is the perfect example with their A380s being placed on the Japan to Hawaii service, which as we know is very popular. The added capacity is therefore always a bonus. The next variant listed was the MD-12 LR, LR standing for long range. This variant I honestly would not see as being a huge success in today's market. Potentially back then yes, but not so much now. Double-decker planes have been known since I'd say the last 30 years as capacity-driven planes. Simply they excel through their added capacity. When the 747 was first introduced, things were definitely different. This was because we didn't have the likes of the A330, 777, A380, 787, A350 ULR, just the general A350, and so on. The 747 was truly game-changing, and the A380 was too for its time. In saying all this, introducing a long-range variant of the MD-12 may not have truly been the best move. While added range is fantastic, they could have applied that potentially in another aircraft type, which could have rivaled the 777-200 variant at the time from Boeing. The next proposed variant was the MD-12 ST. ST standing for stretch. This variant is very interesting, especially if we look at past history. Years before the MD-12 was even thought about, Boeing had been eyeing a stretched version of their 747. This stretched 747 would increase the capacity and allow airlines to transport more passengers between point A and point B. It does seem apparent McDonnell Douglas would have gone with a very similar thing in the stretch version. What impact would this have had on the industry? Similar to the MD-12 LR, I don't believe it would have been great. A perfect example of increasing the capacity of the aircraft without actually applying drastic stretches is the A380+, which Airbus have put on offer as an upgrade for existing customers, or just simply as a new variant, well, for new customers. They've adjusted a number of key features, for instance the stairs that go up to the second deck so that more seats can be added in. This is something potentially McDonnell Douglas could have done with their stock standard MD-12. This is if they did truly want to increase the capacity. In saying all of that, one could simply put forward the question that could the MD-12 high capacity just truly be merged with the MD-12 stretch? I'd be inclined to answer that with a yes. The final variant, and the one that is quite interesting, was the MD-12 Twin, otherwise known as the MD-12 twin-engine version. This would only have 2 engines rather than the 4, and while discussed, never really took off, like for instance their high-capacity variant. It's a very intriguing variant in my opinion, because the idea of having a twin-engine double-decker plane has been around for quite some time. People have engaged in many discussions in my comments section alone as to which engine would be best suited to the job. However, would it have truly changed the order tally for the MD-12? I don't really think so, but on the A380, I'd say it may have been a different story. So what impact would the aircraft have had on Airbus and Boeing on a whole? In all honesty, I don't think it would have had any impact unless it did truly succeed. Some have said that if the MD-12 sealed a number of orders, Boeing would actually have therefore responded by enhancing their 747 that little bit more, and Airbus would have sped up or simply released their A380 at the exact same time. If anything, we may have seen more quad jets in our skies. After all, the industry is known for chain reactions. While thorough research goes into the ordering of aircraft, usually when we see one carrier, like Emirates, order the A380 or even the 777X, it's their close rivals which will analyse that move, and on most occasions opt for the same aircraft. Now, this is definitely also because it best suits that market they are operating in, but a small hint of it is to compete better and on the same level as their rival. So to reiterate, quite obviously as I say this to myself, the MD-12 would have only initiated a reaction from Airbus or Boeing if it did truly sell well, or the interest was exceptionally high to warrant Airbus and Boeing dipping into the double-decker quad-jet market that little bit further. I'd like to thank you very much for watching this analysis video of mine. It's been quite a long one, but I do hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to drop it a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. I do look forward to you all joining me in the next one.
Race all of these broken dreams in flight, and we'll fly.